This is Common Ground on 100.7 WZLX. My name is Kimberley. Thank you so much for tuning in this morning. This interview, actually a two-part interview, is going to be with Gregg Braden. Gregg is a trained scientist. He started off his work career as a scientist, as a computer systems designer, also a computer geologist, among some other technical operations. And today he's considered a leading authority on bridging the wisdom of our past with the science, healing, and peace of our future. And I'll let him explain that a little bit more clearly and also tell you a little bit more about his background. And he has a book that was just released titled The Divine Matrix, Bridging Time, Space, Miracles, and Belief. He's written many books. He's the best-selling author of The God Code and also The Secrets of the Lost Mode of Prayer, which we'll also talk a little bit about that because they all work together. Gregg, I am so looking forward to this interview. Thank you and welcome to Common Ground.
Oh, it's a pleasure to hear your voice, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be on the program today. Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. And I have an unusual admission here. I don't usually do this, but I was not familiar with your work until The Divine Matrix was presented to me. And over the last couple of weeks, I have immersed myself. I read The God Code, The Secret and Lost Mode of Prayer, and The Divine Matrix. So,
well, you've seen some very technical information, some very practical information. You've covered the whole gamut. You may have read more of the material than I have since it was published.
But anyway, so it's going to be really hard to get in everything I have questions about. Let's start off with, obviously, what's your latest work, The Divine Matrix, and why don't you first tell us a bit about your background? I'd like the audience to know that.
Well, sure, Kimberly. And before we even do that, I'm going to back up a little bit. This is the 20th year that we've done this work in one form or another from our first public presentations in 1986 in Denver, Colorado. And the books that you mentioned is diverse and varied as the titles and the material are. On the one hand, they all fall under the same umbrella. On the other hand, of empowering us with a wisdom that has been part of who we are as a species, now being traced back over 8,000 years. We know there's a lineage of wisdom that links our modern technological world today with understandings that are over 8,000 years old, and we know that because the records sharing that wisdom have been found and translated. And we're bridging that wisdom, which is a language that describes our universe and how it works and who we are and how we relate to that universe. We're bridging that with a more recent language that we call science, which is only about 400 years old. And as any scientist will freely admit, as good as our science is, we know our science is incomplete. There are huge gaps and glaring inconsistencies in scientific wisdom. So my path, I was trained as a scientist on the one hand, and I'm happy to talk about that here in just a moment. Mm-hmm. My path has been, and my passion has been to marry these two languages, these two ways of knowing, ancient wisdom and spirituality with modern science, the best science and technology of today, and create even a greater wisdom that empowers us to survive the very challenging time that we find ourselves in history today. And then that leads me into the career path that has brought me to this point. I was trained as a scientist, as an engineer. My degree is in the earth sciences. And to get there, I had a lot of computer science, a lot of math, a lot of ocean science, a lot of space science, physics. And it's interesting to me because as I've studied those sciences, what I found, the ancients didn't make a distinction between geology and biology and physics and astronomy. To them, there was a universe out there, and everything was connected. And as we could understand that connection, we could understand ourselves and our relationship to the world. In modern times, we've compartmentalized all of this into neat, tidy little areas of study that we're comfortable with, called geology, biology, chemistry, physics. And as good as they are all related. Now, I believe this is the shortcoming of modern science, is we have tended to deny that relationship. And in doing that, we have limited ourselves in terms of our knowledge and understanding. On the one hand, on the other hand, we find ourselves at a time in history when, unlike any other time, when for the first time in recorded human history, we as a species, we literally have the power to destroy or preserve everything that we cherish as a civilization, and we can do it in a day. And we've never had that kind of power before. So it is imperative as we look at the wars that are looming on the horizon and the violence of the last 100 years, and the way we've chosen to use our technology and our science based on our beliefs of who we are and how we relate to one another. I think it's imperative that we truly reveal our relationship, the unity of our relationship to our world and to one another, and the power that lives within every one of us to heal our bodies, to bring peace to our world, because it's the same power. And it is that passion that led me from the careers in aerospace and defense and in the earth sciences and communications to a full-time project traveling to some of the most ancient and isolated, magnificent, rugged, pristine places remaining on the earth today where the old information is kept, bring that information back and using my training as a scientist to marry that into something that's meaningful and useful in our lives. And I've distilled that into the books, such as the ones that you've mentioned at the beginning of the program.
Yes, you have.
Yeah, so that was a lot of information in a short period of time, and I wanted to share that so we can tie back into it through the rest of the program.
All right, well, thank you very much. Gregg Braden on Common Ground at 100.7 WZLX. His latest book is The Divine Matrix, Bridging Time, Space, Miracles, and Belief, but kind of talking about his work in general also. You were talking about how, for the first time in history, humans have the power to make the decisions that we can make. Why do you say it's the first time in history that we've had that power?
First time in recorded human history. I'm going to be very clear about that.
Okay.
Because there's a growing body of evidence that we may have had this wisdom before, at a time before we even acknowledged that our history began over 10,000 years ago. And that could perhaps be another interview that we do at some time.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But for the first time in recorded human history, we have the science that led to the technology that has led to the weapons that we have today, where we can destroy entire cities in a matter of hours. We've never had that kind of technology before, and that kind of power. And what makes it so particularly perilous at this time in our history is that we use our technology based on what we believe about ourselves and about one another. And there is a belief in the world today of limit and lack, and a belief that there's not enough to go around. So we are in violent competition for resources, minerals, oil, land, technology. We're in violent competition for these things, and we are willing, and we've proven that we are willing to use our technology and destroy one another, to justified in our belief that we need to have our slice of the pie, and that's a very, very dangerous place to be.
I'd like to interject. The one thing that you didn't list in that is our sense of being separate versus our sense of all being connected too.
Well, this is where the Divine Matrix comes in. Yeah. All of the work, once again, as diverse as the topics of the titles appear to be, they are all rooted in an understanding. And that understanding is the basis, it's the crux for this most recent release, for the Divine Matrix, the subtitle, Bridging Space, Time, Miracles, and Belief. And what's so interesting to me, Kimberley, is that Western science in the late 20th century has just arrived at the place where the indigenous and the spiritual traditions of our past begin and have for thousands of years. And that is with the understanding that we are all connected and that our universe is united through a field of intelligent, non-conventional energy that works in ways we're only beginning to understand. Western scientists, there is little doubt that this field now exists. It's pretty well accepted in the field of physics and quantum physics. The field is there. And the question now scientists are asking, they're saying, okay, the field is here. What do we do with it? How do we use it? And this is so interesting to me because when we go into the monasteries in the central highlands China and Tibet, or the monasteries in the mountains of Egypt on the Sinai Peninsula, or in the high Andes of southern Peru and Bolivia. The teachings and the traditions, the culture and the texts, they all allow for this connection through this field. And this is what their understandings and their teachings are all about. So they begin with the premise that we're all connected, number one. And number two, they say, okay, now we'll take you one step further. Here is how you apply this connection in your lives. This is how you use this connectivity, this unity, to heal, literally heal your physical body and those of your loved ones, to bring peace to your communities and your families, and to literally create and participate, not control, not manipulate, but participate in the way that your life unfolds on this earth. And it's part of their culture. And what I discovered as a scientist, I was trained to look in the world around me to unlock the secrets and the mysteries of our past, physical evidence. And what I began to find is that those understandings that are held in those ancient and indigenous traditions that seem so foreign to our Western frame of reference today were in fact a part of the Western Judeo-Christian spiritual understandings until they were edited from our texts 1,700 years ago in the 4th century. Mm-hmm. And we know they were edited because we found the records in the Dead Sea Scrolls and in the Nag Hammadi libraries. We find them in the libraries of the monasteries today. So we had the same understandings, we meaning the Western Judeo-Christian tradition. We had those same understandings of how we heal and bring peace and harmony to our communities and live with our world instead of battling the forces of nature and feeling that nature is our adversary. We understood that very well until those traditions were edited about 1,700 years ago. So what we're doing, all of this work, and the Divine Matrix spells this out very clearly, is we are bridging the science of today, the best science of today. And our science is good. It's just incomplete, and we're filling in the missing pieces and making it applicable with the wisdom and the understandings, and many of those are the spiritual, holistic understandings of our past.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to mention that we talk about belief a lot on this program, but I really want you to give the scientific evidence, or not evidence, but what's been happening as far as research and whatnot, to kind of, for the person who's more of a left-brained person versus a right-brained person. And I want to mention I'm talking with Gregg Braden here on Common Ground at 100.7 WZLX.
Well, Kimberley, I'll make my confession in that I don't get to listen to your program. So I don't know that you talk a lot about belief, but if you do, what I know is belief means different things to different people, and I'm discovering that as we travel the world. The last 5 years have been on every continent of the earth, sharing this information in one form or another. And what I know is that words like belief, like human emotion, human feelings, they mean different things to different people. So I'll begin by saying this. We tend to live our lives within the bounds and based upon what we believe to be true about our world, our relationship to one another, our relationship to the earth, our capabilities and our limits. They're all based in what we believe individually and collectively to be true. And once I understood that, I said, well, where do those beliefs come from? And what I found was that more often than not, our beliefs come from what other people tell us, from what science tells us, or what religion or history or culture or our own family or community traditions, what they tell us. My question then was, what if the things that we've been told are wrong? What if we're living our lives within the limits, the limits of false beliefs? What if we're living in a false paradigm of limit? What would happen if we found that we are truly capable of much more? And that is what led to the 20-year research project that now is published as the Divine Matrix. The bottom line to this book is what we know is there is a field of energy, an intelligent field of energy that not only connects everything, it plays three functions. It's the container for everything that happens in the universe. This field of energy is what holds the universe together, number one. Number two, the field is a bridge between what happens inside of our bodies and what happens in the world around us. So it's the conduit. Through this bridge, our beliefs, our emotions are carried from our hearts and our minds into the stuff our world is made of beyond our bodies. And number three, this field is a mirror. It literally is a quantum mirror that shows back to us in the stuff around us what it is that we believe to be true inside of us. So now our beliefs, if this is true, if these relationships are true, and this is what science is now proving under laboratory conditions, and it's what the ancient spiritual traditions have preserved in their practices, that our beliefs are literally the building blocks that the quantum stuff of the universe conforms to give us our reality, our relationships, our intimate relationships, our careers, our abundance, our health, or the lack of all of those things. What scientists are beginning to discover, and what the traditions are saying, is that those things are the mirror of what we have accepted and what we believe to be true from within. So if we'd like to change our world, if we'd like healing in our bodies or the bodies of our loved ones, or more abundance in our lives, or more supportive, nurturing relationships, or more peace in our world, and these relationships work the way that they're being shown, then it makes perfect sense that when we change our beliefs, those things will change as well. And that's precisely what this book is all about, giving not only the information that is possible, but taking us, again, one step further with the instructions of how we go about changing our beliefs. And I think that's why it's such an important book.
Very much so. Divine Matrix, Gregg Braden on Common Ground at 100.7 WZLX. Where I'm trying to get you to go is we have a couple of minutes here. It's like, why don't you pick one of the experiments as an example so people can get a sense of how that plays out in the book?
Certainly. Well, there are a number of experiments that we share in the book, and I wanted to lay the foundation for listeners that may have never heard of any of this before, so they have a feeling for where we're going. The essence of quantum physics begins back in 1909 with a very famous experiment. It was called the double slit experiment, where physicists were isolating quantum particles, and they were able to shoot them, to fire them from a projector, passing through a number of barriers to a target that could detect the form or the nature of those particles, if they were physical particles or if they were invisible forms of energy. And the bottom line, and the great mystery to all these experiments, was what they found was the expectation or the beliefs or the awareness or the understandings of the people in the room, the observers, were what was determining how those particles behaved. And this rocked the world and the foundation of conventional wisdom, because what it said was that somehow everyone in the room was part of the experiment. There were no passive observers just watching the experiment. The act of consciousness, knowing that there were different pathways for these particles to take, because the observers knew this, they were actually determining which of those pathways and whether or not those particles had to become invisible energy, or whether or not those particles had to be discrete particles to move through these pathways. So the key to this whole experiment, the very famous double-slit experiment performed in 1909, was it was the first time that scientists actually opened the door to the possibility that we are part of the things that are happening in the world around us, that we're influencing those things. Well, this has been very controversial. It's been the crux of the quantum mystery since that time. In 1998, these experiments were repeated at the Weizmann Institute of Science in Israel with better equipment. And not only did they confirm the original experiments in 1909, but what they found, it took it one step further, they found that the more we focus our awareness on what those particles are doing, the longer and the more pronounced the effect upon the particles. In other words, the more we focus our awareness or our attention or our expectations as to whether or not the particles are going to behave one way or another, the more we create that focus, the more effect we have upon those particles. Well, this is important because the particles are what you and me and our world are made of. So what the scientists are finding is that the more we can focus in a particular way our consciousness on the stuff we're made of, the more effect we have on the stuff we're made of. Mm-hmm. And now the quantum physics begins to sound very much like the very principles of our most ancient and cherished traditions, whether we're talking about ancient Hebrew or ancient Christian, ancient Hindu, ancient Buddhist, the indigenous traditions. I live in the desert, high deserts of the Southwest, and the Native American peoples of our neighbors live these understandings today. It's always been a part of their tradition.
Yeah, and I want to throw in the Toltec.
The Toltec, Mayan, we find it in the Andes in Peru, with the Quechua in the Puno areas of Lake Titicaca in Bolivia. It's like the great secret everybody knows except us. So it really is it's a beautiful bridge. All of our work is intended to bridge science and spirituality into a greater understanding that empowers us to survive the challenges of our time in history, the diseases that we've never seen before, everything from avian flu and Ebola to AIDS and whatever the next virus is on the horizon, to the threat of nuclear annihilation, to the threat of global weather change. All of those things now are scientifically linked to human consciousness and the way that we perceive and feel and believe those things are happening in our lives. That's a huge statement to make. Mm-hmm. And it's scientifically verifiable, and it is the essence of our most cherished and oldest spiritual, not religious. I'm going to make a distinction here. This isn't about religion. It's about the holistic connectivity, the spiritual understandings that we are all unified and connected with a greater essence. And the way that we make use of that essence is the practice that becomes our lives. That's what this material is all about. Mm-hmm.
Gregg Braden on Common Ground at 100.7 WZLX. I need to throw this in because if anybody who's listening has studied Einstein at all, yeah, he was on that track. He got a few things wrong, which I learned about reading The Divine Matrix, but he was certainly coming at things from that perspective, don't you think?
Well, he was, and we've got to think about his time in history, how interesting it would have been. There was a tremendous spiritual revolution that was sweeping the earth in the late 1800s. And you think about the discoveries and the understandings that had to be made then so that we could have the science and technology that we have today. And what we find is that many of the great discoveries, everything from the way the electricity works and Tesla's work and Einstein's work and Heisenberg and Bohr and Max Planck, and just amazing time, a very exciting time to be around because it's like new ideas were, they were just coming out of the woodwork in terms of how our world really works. And there were two schools of thought then, and they continue today, regarding our relationship to the universe. One school of thought, and this is probably when I was in school and probably when you were in school and many of our listeners, this is what we were taught. The universe has been here for a long time, that we've come along relatively recently, and that we have little effect on the world around us and on the universe as a whole. And when we're gone, the universe isn't going to care much. It's going to go on pretty much as it always has, with or without us. That's one school of thought, and Einstein was more or less of that school of thought. Mm-hmm. There was another school of thought that's just the opposite, that says maybe we didn't create the universe, that the universe isn't finished yet, and that we are participating in co-creating what the universe looks like right now, that our consciousness is actually the stuff that's changing the form of the universe around us. And one of Einstein's colleagues, who is still with us today, Dr. John Wheeler of Princeton University, was a pioneer in this kind of thinking. And unfortunately, he's caught a lot of flack from his colleagues because it was originally an unpopular viewpoint. However, today, the science is bearing out more and more that Wheeler is probably closer to right than we've thought in the past. And the truth is that there's probably a middle ground between those two ways of thinking. But what John Wheeler is saying is that consciousness is the building block of what our universe is made of. And when you hear statements like that, you think, well, it's kind of nebulous. What does it really mean? And the key, what it really means, if our listeners have ever wondered why, with all the science and technology and the Hubble telescope, we've never been able to find the edge of the universe, for example. We don't really know where the edge of the universe is, or where the smallest particle of matter, or what the smallest quantum particle looks like. Every time we isolate it, we break an atom into a bajillion pieces, and then we study each of those little fragments, thinking that we've found the smallest particle of stuff. And what we find is that those smallest particles are made of many, many, many even smaller particles. So the question is why haven't we found that smallest essence of what the universe is made of, or why haven't we found the edge of the universe? John Wheeler's proposal that consciousness is the building block of the universe may give us the answer as to why we won't find the edge of the universe or the smallest particle, because what he's saying is that consciousness, in and of itself, consciousness is an act of creation, that the act of us looking, the act of consciousness peering to the edge of the universe or looking at the smallest particle of matter with an expectation that something will be there, the act of us looking with the expectation is an act of creation. Consciousness will always put something there for us to see. And if that's true, we're never going to see the edge, because every time we look beyond the edge, we're putting something else for us to see. And this is precisely the kinds of things that are being borne out under laboratory conditions today. The great controversy in the world of quantum physics, the things we're talking about now, if you had a quantum physicist who had devoted his entire life to studying physics on the phone right now on this program, they would agree with what we're saying. The disagreement and where the controversy comes from is that many physicists believe that the things we're seeing happening in the quantum world were all made out of these quantum particles, and they do miraculous things. They can be in two places at once. They can be physical matter. They can be invisible energy. They can travel in time. They can heal themselves. The crux of the controversy is that quantum physicists observe these on the quantum level, and then they believe that this has no effect and no impact on our everyday lives. They say, yes, we are made out of these particles. Yes, these particles do these miraculous things. However, those miraculous things have nothing to do with how we're driving our car in the freeway or what the abundance in our checkbook looks like, or the healing in the bodies of our loved ones. And this is where the ancient wisdom is bridging what science has found and saying, oh, yes, there is a connection, and the connection is determined by the individual. And that opens up a whole new realm of vast possibilities, and it implies that we all have a lot of responsibility in our lives, which a lot of people don't like to hear.
Thank you, Gregg. And luckily, Gregg has agreed to do a hour interview with me, so this interview will continue. I have more questions for Gregg Braden. Want to mention his website, greggbraden.com. That's GreggBraden.com. And we're discussing his latest book, The Divine Matrix, along with some of his previous work. And Common Ground will continue momentarily here on 100.7 WZLX.